Luke Guide. You want to learn how to fight Luke? This is how you fight Luke. This is what he drops. I'm going to do a little overview of the fight before I get into the details of each phase. As I'm editing this, I realized that most of this fight involves the idea of dodging multiple patterns at the same time, so keep that in mind as you watch. I'll talk about counters at the end of the video, so if you want to skip ahead to those, then there will be timestamps in the description. The two most important utilities in this fight are slows and decoys. Decoys behind Luke as much as you can, and slows on orbs as often as possible. The Luke fight can be divided into 4 main sections, each one lasting a quarter of his health. For the first 25% of the fight, he will be at the top of the room and do a cycle of attacks. Once pushed to 75%, he will run to the middle of the room and do his first rotation phase. When he hits 50%, he will move to the bottom side of the room and do the same attacks as he did in the first phase, except now they do a little more damage. After pushing him to 25%, he will move back to the center of the room and finish up the fight with a second rotation phase. When he is pushed to 50% of his health and moves to the bottom of the room, I'd recommend rotating your screen 180 degrees. Counter phases are triggered when one of these orbs gets to him. They spawn around the banners, and occasionally they'll start flashing and moving towards him quickly. These orbs should be slowed and killed the moment you see them. During counter phases, he is completely invulnerable and they only serve to prolong the fight. During his first and third phases, sickening shots will periodically shoot from the corners of the room depending on what side he is on. This wall of V-shaped attacks is commonly called carrots. It is easier to dodge them the closer you are to the boss, since when they get closer to the back of the room, they will spread out and lengthen. Even when playing staff or wand classes during this phase, I'll still typically be within melee range, since the firing pattern of the sickening shots makes them easier to dodge when you're closer to the center of the room. Usually I'll move left to right to avoid the carrots, and up and down for the sickens. These wide shotguns paralyze and are much easier to dodge when you're closer to the boss. When you sit closer to Luke in this phase, you just have to move less to get between the gaps. If you're on the outside, you just have a lot more ground to cover to get between the gaps. This phase is commonly called boomerangs because these giant shotguns will boomerang back towards him after hitting their full length. This is a very important phase for tricksters because these shots can be decoyed behind him, turning this phase into an AFK fest. It's important to get decoys up at the end of other phases because then the decoy will get the first 2 shotguns at the start of this phase. Another very important thing to know about is the last 2 shotguns of this phase will linger into the next phase. This is bomb phase, and it's one of the most chaotic phases in the entire fight. Decoys are important in this phase for the single arrow. He throws out 2 spreads of bombs which always land in a pattern of a W, as well as these orbs which will shoot out spreads of smaller projectiles. It is safer to stay closer to him during this phase, even without a decoy. If there's no decoy, you can dodge left and right to bait the arrows, and the bombs and orb shots won't hit you if you're closer to him. This is tentacle phase. There's a safe spot in the middle for this phase on the large L on the carpet. However, I'd strongly recommend to not safe spot there and try pushing up because it's a very easy way to get counters. Nearly every third counter I've done in a Luke fight has been caused because of people sitting middle in tentacle phase. Orbs can spawn at the top left and top right banners and then just move straight to Luke without anyone even touching them. Here's a picture of other safe spots during this phase, and I'd recommend going here and sitting on the corner of the carpet. Another thing you can do is weave left and right through the tentacle and tank a single shot or 2, or, when you get experience with crossing, tanking none of them. Alright, on to rotation phase. So he'll move to the center of the room, and then you'll have to pick one of these little triangles on the inside and rotate with him. The rotation will change directions once these beams get telegraphed. You'll have these candles rotating on the outside and shooting sickens toward the walls of the room, and then you'll have paralyzing shots going on the inside. If you get paralyzed, you're going to want to chug pots or nexus, because if these tentacles change rotation while they're on you, you take a lot more damage than you'd think. After the first rotation phase, I'd recommend rotating your screen 180 degrees, so he's at the top of the room. And if this is the last rotation phase, then don't forget to reset your screen. During rotation phase, you can safe spot in the corner, but you should learn to rotate eventually. In third phase, all of his attacks are basically the same as first phase, except they have a different color, and now they do a bit more damage, so there's not really much point in me going into detail on them. Alright, onto the counters. First counter is an easier version of third counter, and second counter is an easier version of fourth counter, so I'm only going to go over third and fourth counter. If you can do third and fourth consistently, you can very easily do first and second. Also, first and second counters are extremely rare. In the nearly 1,000 runs that I've done, I've only seen maybe 3 or 4 first counters. Third counter is difficult because you have to dodge 2 separate patterns independently, yet completely simultaneously. You have to dodge left and right for the paralyzing shots, and up and down for the lasers. Any wrong move here could mean a fast death. You can get paralyzed and then be dunked on by lasers, and in my experience, this phase is easier to do near the side of the room, as it feels like there's more gaps between the paralyzing shots. Starting near the top of the room is easier since it gives you more freedom with backing up. If you get pushed too far down, then you'll be shoved into pet stasis shots on the end of the room. If you get this counter during boomerangs, it's important to remember that those boomerang shots will linger into the third counter. In the description, I'll have a link to a website that lets you practice third counter, and it also lets you practice Dama's Miasma and O3 Celestial. I don't feel that the Celestial on this website is super accurate, but it's better than nothing. The third counter practice, however, is very good. As for fourth counter, you're going to want to back out of the rotation phase and hug the wall, and cross beams whenever you're comfortable. After you cross, then you're going to want to hug the banners on the sides, and then push back in after the counter ends. Some people like to push back in during the counter, but personally, I just like pushing in after. When you cross beams, you just want to hug the wall, and then don't worry about tanking a tentacle shot or two. At most, you'll take 2 or 3 if you're unlucky, and if you're max def life, you should be fine. I tried a much more formal approach to this guide than I did with the Dama guide, so if you liked it, if you didn't like it, please leave a comment, DM me. I want to make this series as good for new players as I can, and I think criticism is a great way to do that.